Welcome. In today's video, we're going to be discussing pseudo female empowerment, which is essentially just turning women into men. And what I mean by that is there's a realm of society that is uniquely female, and there's a realm of society that is uniquely male. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that there are quote unquote gender roles that everybody needs to fit into. That's the first thing I want to say. I'm an individualist. Everybody should be able to do their own thing. At that being said, however, we do and have crossed the Rubicon to the point where there's individuals out there who don't want there to be any difference between male and female. That men can do the same things women can do, and women can do the same thing men can do, even to the ridiculous notion that men can get pregnant. It is absolutely asinine. All right? It is asinine. There are few women who are as strong as the weakest males. There are no men who can get pregnant. All right, so we're in a situation here where there are realms of the female and there are realms of the male. That being said, there is a very good quote that I think typifies this entire commentary that we're going to get into today. And that is, women are human beings. Men are human doings. It is a quote by Warren Farrell, who for a long time was the male president of the National Organization for Women. After he saw the feminist movement going towards more hatred of men and seeing that men were now being, ostracized in universities and stuff like that, he turned away from that. And actually, he's still essentially a male feminist, but he is now more educating people on how society is vilifying maleness, masculinity, especially boys, young boys. So the quote in itself should tell you, it needs to be broken down. When he says women are human beings, what he means is that a woman's power is essentially just being who she is. If you look up a lot of symbolism, one of the things that you'll notice is that in the old sculptures, Greek sculptures and whatever of women, they're always naked. The nakedness of the woman represents not just sexuality, because that's not how they were thinking of it. They're thinking of the natural power, the natural beauty of women, meaning that everything that the woman has is for a purpose. The breasts are for feeding babies. Obviously, the vagina is for birthing babies. That was her power. Her power was in her body, in her form. That was what made her necessary. And if you look into today's conversation about things like abortion, you'll often see women say, we're not just baby making machines. They're rejecting their entire sole purpose in existence, which is to procreate, which is to create the next generation. But in the past, which is why we had things like women and children first, in terms of, if there's going to be a giant battle, the men wouldn't go through, they would slaughter all the men, even all the boys above the age of 15 or whatever, but they'd save the children and they wouldn't kill the women. The women were considered to be a treasure. You take the women and you keep them. And sometimes you use them to birth your next generation, which of course in time was pretty brutal in a way, but the idea was that the women would survive, at least because it was nothing honorable in slaughtering women. There was nothing honorable in killing women. And in fact, killing women actually, ruins your own village. It can harm yourself. This is why women were never sent into war. Not just because women are physically not as strong as men, but also when you send your women to war, you limit your ability to procreate and to create the next generation. If a woman's husband dies, she can always marry another man, and that was generally the idea. So the strength of the woman was always in her physical body, which she can actually do, something that the men cannot do. But when you see sculptures of males, they're almost always robed, except for in some instances where you may see naked men drawn. But more importantly, they were drawn in a way where they had a job. This is why when Warren Farrell says men are human doings, you think about men in uniforms. This is where we get the concept of, a woman loves a man in uniform. police officers, firefighters, men in suits, CEOs, that sort of thing. Because a man has to do something in order to prove himself to women. And this is where we get the idea from. We get the Super Mario concept. Mario is a plumber. He wears a uniform. He wears an overall. He's wearing a t-shirt. He's got these gloves. He's got the little hat. He's a plumber. And he's going to go on this great adventure to save Princess Peach, who has to have no character. She doesn't have to have a personality at all. In fact, it took, several decades before, she even had a name. And it wasn't important. The important thing is you were Mario, you wanted to save the princess. That was the important thing. And for a lot of boys, that was enough. You want to be the guy that wants to save the princess. Who the princess is as a person, what her actual name is, was irrelevant. There have been tons of stories of like Rapunzel, for instance. You want to be the guy that climbs up the tower to save Rapunzel. Nobody ever says whether Rapunzel is a good person or not, whether she's beautiful and all these sorts of things or not. All of that is secondary to the fact that you want to be the hero of the story that saves Rapunzel. That's generally speaking how societies have been structured for a long time. But now in weird world that we live in today, there's these concepts that don't really mesh anymore. It's not just a matter that we now want princesses to have names and have personalities, but now we have started to develop this concept that the princess should save herself. Therefore, there's no need for the hero. And we see this sort of egregiousness even being dumped into modern movies and modern TV shows. I didn't see the movie Shazam all the way through, but I heard there was a scene in Shazam in which Shazam shows up to save a woman from a mugger, only for the woman to save herself. So the hero stands there while the woman fights off the mugger herself. I believe this was also in Venom. I did see this in Venom. I think Venom 2, where Venom shows up to save a woman from a mugger, only for the woman this fat black woman, to beat up the mugger herself and save herself from the whole ordeal. And you sit at this, and you look at this, and you say to yourself, it is a very interesting story that we're not talking about in this situation. A story where a woman is in a situation, she takes it upon herself to get revenge, or there was nobody else around, so she has to fight back. This is a situation in which they put a male hero right there, and he did nothing, and he served no purpose. There is something symbolic about that alone, that males will just stand around, or you should just stand around and let women struggle and save themselves from usually other males. And it's a slap in the face to the heroic imperative, to the concept of men as success objects, as they call it. That's what it means to be wearing a uniform. You're a success object. And it's a slap in the face. We don't need you. I can do it myself. And that has been the sort of feminist system for several decades now, is that we don't really need men. And the concept of that, of course, is ludicrous. But, how could human beings have survived for so long if women didn't need men, or if men didn't need women? How could this possibly have occurred for so long? But it's the situation that we find ourselves in now. And a lot of this comes from the feminist concept. Have you ever heard the idea of the woman who wants to have it all? She wants to have the highfalutin CEO life. She wants to be the partner in the law firm, the CEO of the business, but she also wants to be a wife and mother. And she also wants to be an equal partner to her husband, and all of these sorts of things. And then when you actually look at it, it never really occurs that way. And what you often see is that women who are very, very, very highly successful are often dedicating their entire lives to that success, and therefore they go childless. Or you'll see the other way around, where a woman will sacrifice her career to become a mother, and then therefore she will blame her children and blame her husband for her lack of financial success. And this is often something that you see discussed in like the gender wage gap. You will see this sort of discussion come up where, women will drop out of the workforce because they met their husband at the job. This happens a lot. A woman meets her husband at the job. They meet, they get married. She leaves the workforce to have children. Maybe he makes enough money to cover them both. Nurse marries doctor, or secretary marries doctor, or whatever. She leaves the workforce. He covers the income for both people. And then maybe as the children grow up, she comes back into the workforce later on to fulfill her personal success or ambitions, but only to find that, she's now out of the loop for a year or 2 years or 3 years, or sometimes even more, maybe sometimes even as much as 10 years. She's been out of the workforce. So she's not going to get the opportunities to go as forward in her career as often as those who have never left the workforce. So you will often see in these situations women who are lesbians, who don't have children, or just, eschew the idea of having children. They will often make it to the pinnacles. They will get far in their chosen fields, where traditional women will at one point fall off as they go and have children and, live the domesticated life that now the feminist movement has told them is awful and a shackle to them. So that explains sort of like the wage gap and stuff like that. Not, a bunch of people hiring women for less money. It's just, it's kind of ridiculous. But a lot of it is hours worked. You started seeing, when women started entering the workforce, you started seeing more things like work-life balance. That was never a question when most men were when it was mostly male workforce. You were not expected to have a work-life balance. If dad was away from the house for 14 hours a day, that's just what it was. Now, if mommy is away from the house for 14 hours a day, we need to crow about work-life balance. That sort of thing. And I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. I'm just saying, have you noticed that? That when men were away from the house, when men go out and die in war, it is a tragedy, but it's an acceptable tragedy. But when we start asking women to go and do it, okay, now it's abhorrent. It's not something we can actually do. And this is something that, has become a thing in the United States, where they, on the subject of abortion, for instance, it says what laws are designed specifically for the male body. And you have to say, what about conscription? The draft. All boys in the United States are subject to the draft. None of the girls are. And that's still today in 2022 as of recording. You cannot draft women in the military. And women are okay with that. And most people are okay with that. And if you ask most conservatives, they are okay with that because they think drafting your daughters into the war is disgusting and not something that they can support. Neither here nor there. But it says a lot that in our society, we're okay with what we call male disposability. And that is the concept that boys can be replaced, or that boys are defective girls. And this is where we kind of get the gender identity stuff, is that boys are just defective girls. And you see this a lot in how boys are treated in schools, for instance. Boys are very hyperactive. They're very physical. Boys often are the targets of, and you get this in public schools, they talk about how black children are reprimanded and punished more than white children. And you'll often see that most of these people who are reprimanded and punished are not just quote unquote black children. They're often boys because they're very aggressive. They're very loud. They like to move around. So you see a lot of different ways that boys are treated in our society. One of the things that I learned is how heavily medicated young boys are. They're put on, these ADHD drugs and stuff like this that often girls are not put on, at least not as early or as often as boys are. Because boys are expected to sit still and learn and be lectured to, because that's what people expect boys to be. But that's more of a girl thing. And we saw that in societies as our culture moved away from hands-on learning, which seems to be, and I'm just speaking in generalities here, more what tends to be in the realm of boys. Boys like to get out and do stuff, Let's get his hands dirty. Let's teach him the old-fashioned way by learning by doing. And we've moved more towards the lecture, which is sitting still, being quiet, and, asking questions by putting your hand up, that sort of thing. That's more of a girl's way of learning. And we see that as we have moved more towards the girls' way of learning, boys did worse in school. And then we also saw that there are teachers who, knowingly or not, would grade girls higher than boys and for doing the same work, you know. And then we started seeing like the nitpicking. You know, boys answer questions too often because they're more assertive. So we will have to ignore the boys when they want to answer questions and make sure that we talk to the girls. And you started seeing that stuff more and more in society. And this is kind of what got Warren Farrell to move over towards speaking more on masculinity and boys' issues. Is that we started to see society, you know, say that girls were falling behind, you know, in test scores and being what we think that they should be. And this is kind of 15 minutes into this video. We're finally starting to get into what I think the issue is. And what I'm saying is that society has decided that certain things that are quote unquote the realm of the male should be limited or integrated, and therefore girls should be forcibly put into it. And that may mean handicapping boys. And we see that a lot in our mediums, such as movies, TV shows, comic books, video games, etc., where now it's male replacement. You know, the girls are just as good as the boys. Therefore, we can put a girl in a boy's spot and nothing should change. And you see this a lot in action movies. Action movies within the last, you know, this 2022 as time of recording. For the last 15 to 20 years, you started seeing action movies in which 5'4" women are kickboxing the shit out of 6' men. You know, movies like Black Widow, movies like Salt, movies like Columbiana, Kill Bill, for instance. I like Kill Bill. She used a sword, you know, so that was a little bit different. But we started moving women into the realm of the male. We started giving women guns all the time in movies. We started basically having women replace the men in leadership positions. We started taking traditionally male roles and giving them to women. Nothing typifies the feminist imperative to just be like men than a tweet that I stumbled across, and it's very interesting. It says, quote, "It's shameful that Dragon Ball, Naruto, and My Hero Academia all start decades apart from each other, but end up writing women the exact same way." So this was a pretty big topic on Twitter. And I have to tell you that, if you want to talk about it, for starters, the person obviously has never heard of shonen, which means it is a boy-centered manga. And it's a manga written for young boys. All three of these feature the same type of story. It is a shonen anime or shonen manga that's aimed at young boys. Now, I'm not as far along in My Hero Academia as most people because I read only the physical copies. I don't read it online. I have never read Naruto at all. And Dragon Ball, I have seen all of the shows, but I have never actually read the manga. But I know exactly where they're going with this concept, which is that the fighting female characters are usually put off to the side. In Dragon Ball, they're usually motherhood. You know, I remember this being a big thing when Android 18 was sort of married off to Krillin, and then she was put on the sideline, especially since as Krillin was continued to be used as a fighter. Now, we've been talking in this video thus far about, you know, male disposability. Even though Android 18 is much stronger than Krillin, she essentially did not take his place. He was not a stay-at-home father. He was a warrior who, you know, was friends with Goku and continued to be that, while she lived a fairly normal life. But one interesting response to this tweet, I think, typifies probably this entire video, and I probably could have talked about just this alone. And that is, sometimes women drive the story without being the same kind of character as the man. So somebody responded to this in the most beautiful way possible by saying, "Bulma is the most important character in Dragon Ball. She created the Dragon Radar. She created the time machine that sent Trunks to the past in order to defeat Cell and the androids. She created the medicine, which saved Goku from the heart virus in the current timeline. And she's a fantastic character." And then you realize that Dragon Ball would not be possible without Bulma. No, Bulma is a fighter. She's not a Super Saiyan. But Bulma is one of the most important characters in Dragon Ball. And it's almost as if that the character of Bulma, because she's not a fighter and a Super Saiyan, people don't really respect that character. And it goes to show that people are defining what a woman should be or how a woman should fit into the story by what the men are doing. So, well, no matter what a woman does, if it's not exactly the same thing that a man is doing, then it's not worth anything. And that should tell you right there the kind of toxic, poisonous concepts that we have. Not only does this person not understand genres, this person does also clearly did not understand what the female character brought to the show in the way of her intelligence. And that's just Bulma. There are other female characters in other shonen manga that lend all types of other kinds of support, and that makes them interesting and irreplaceable characters. Unlike when, let's say, Cowboy Bebop, which sought to replace the seductress of Faye Valentine with just creating, well, another Spike Spiegel. And when you make two of the same character, well, do you really care about the second one? No. Characters are individual, and they should be individual. And that means sometimes a male character has to play support. Sometimes a female character has to play support. I remember some people having this conversation about Barbara Gordon, Oracle. When Barbara Gordon was attacked by the Joker in the Killing Joke, and she was shot, and she was put in a wheelchair, and she becomes Oracle for Birds of Prey, and she becomes Oracle for Batman. And it became, for some people, a very empowering character because Oracle was different. You know, she wasn't Batgirl anymore. She was no longer running around in a suit with the ears and everything, jumping from rooftops, fighting bad guys. Now she was tech support. You know, she was behind a desk, but she knew tons of information. She played a different role, but was just as important. And for some people, even more important, because she wasn't just a female Batman. She wasn't just a knockoff Batman. She was something different. And we saw that people complained about that too. There was a tug of war for Barbara Gordon. Should she be a original character, or should she be a knockoff of Batman? And it seemed that over the years, the people who want her to just be a knockoff version of Batman actually won. And you ask yourself, is the DC universe's, the Batman universe, is the character of Barbara Gordon better fit to be a knockoff version of Batman, or her own character in Oracle? It depends on how you see it, but I've noticed that there's a lot of people who would much rather the character just be a knockoff, which goes to show that, you know, female characters are not really respected for what they can personally bring to the table by being different than the male characters. This brings us, of course, to Thor, which, of course, the newest movie is going to be coming out, Thor: Love and Thunder, in which Jane Foster will become Thor, quote unquote, will become Thor. Of course, this is based off of Jane Foster becoming Thor in the comic books. And generally speaking, all of the animosity that brought that will continue throughout the discourse about Thor: Love and Thunder. I'm not going to get into that. We've already crossed that Rubicon. But in comic books, you see this repeatedly again and again. Currently, in time of recording, May 2022, Doctor Strange, despite the fact that he has a #1 movie in the country, is dead in the comic books. He's been replaced by his wife, Clea, who is now the Sorcerer Supreme. And so you see Blade, the vampire killing badass. Well, he's gone essentially from the Marvel Universe. We don't know where he is. We don't know what's going on. He's been replaced with his daughter. So now he's going to have a daughter who is going to take his spot. We've seen Iron Man killed off and replaced with Riri Williams, because all we need to do is just get rid of the guys, and then the girls could take over. It's male replacement theory, male disposability. You take the concept of Iron Man. The Iron Man property is especially egregious to me because I'm a fan of the 80s and early 90s Iron Man. I love Iron Man. The Bob Layton, David Michelini version of Iron Man. I have tons of that stuff in boxes in my closet. No, Iron Man isn't the #1 superhero in Marvel. It wasn't until the movies that Iron Man became a top property. But you had generations and generations of people ignoring Iron Man, acting like it was just like a B-level superhero. And if you talk to a lot of the comic book guys, they'll tell you Iron Man was never a top seller for Marvel, and it isn't today in May of 2022. But mostly because of what they did to Iron Man. That it wasn't a top selling comic book. You could easily have replaced, and they did, Tony Stark with Jim Rhodes for a little while, and it was what it was. Jim Rhodes being a War Machine, and it was what it was. Nobody really thought that much about Iron Man. So you had years upon years of Iron Man being an obscure character that you had to really be into comic books to know. Even though he had a cartoon series, the cartoon series didn't last very long. And then finally the character breaks through in the realm of the Marvel movies thanks to Robert Downey Jr. And then they decide, hey, Iron Man is a top superhero for us now. We're just going to kill him and replace him with a girl because we can. And because the suit is obviously the cell, not the guy in the suit. It's the suit that is the cell. You could just put anybody in the suit. And then we started seeing that sort of thing. There was a time there for Marvel where Dr. Doom was Iron Man. And it's just kind of like, okay, Tony Stark is just irrelevant. And in the Dan Slott version of Iron Man, we started seeing that there's Iron Man Incorporated or Tony Stark Enterprises, where it's not a one single hero. It's a team of individuals who make Iron Man work and that sort of thing. So you just started seeing that this male disposability, that the guys can just be thrown into the meat grinder, and then that's it. You don't need them. You can replace Tony Stark with Riri Williams. You can replace Blade with his daughter. You can replace Doctor Strange with Clea. You can replace Thor with Jane Foster. You can replace Spider-Man with Spider-Gwen or Silk or whoever. You can just take female characters, slap it over the male character, and it's just as good. And it's exactly the same thing. And it's like, no, it's not. And if you say that it's not, then, well, you're a misogynist. It's like nobody wants to see a male version of Wonder Woman. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody cares about male versions of Wonder Woman. People want Wonder Woman, and everything that entails. Whatever and I know that for years, Wonder Woman never carried a sword. And this is one of the things that some people actually get kind of tight-assed about it. I'm not really as tight-assed about it. But for years, people said Wonder Woman was supposed to be the messenger of love. That was her mission, was to spread love. Yes, she was strong. She was fast. She could fly. Sometimes she could fly. She could reflect bullets and all these sorts of things. Sure. But, she wasn't a warrior she wasn't Warrior Woman. That's Marvel's version of Wonder Woman. She was Wonder Woman. And that her chief power was the truth, love, and that sort of thing. She had physical strength, but, in recent years, they started giving Wonder Woman a sword, making her a warrior, like a Spartan or a Greek warrior. And some people find that to be offensive to the Wonder Woman character, especially to how she was created. But I see that, okay, it's a natural progression. As long as they don't make Wonder Woman like Red Sonja. Red Sonja is essentially the female version of Conan the Barbarian. Marvel Comics basically took the Red Sonja character and turned it into, its own property that now is pretty much run by Dynamite. Where Sonja is, like I said, female version of Conan the Barbarian. She drinks, she fights, she drinks and she fights and she has like chainmail bra, and that's pretty much it. Like, you can, in some instances, replace Conan with Red Sonja in the stories, and it won't be that much of a difference. The difference being that there's really not that much sex in a Red Sonja story. That, they actually did an interesting thing with her backstory where, she cannot really get involved with sex like that. Where I think she can only have sex with men who are better than her. You have to defeat her in battle before you can have sex with her or something like that. And since she's so good at fighting, she rarely ever loses a battle or something like that. So it's that sort of thing. But we've seen again and again that there's a belief that you can just replace men with women and it's going to be okay. And it gets away from what the female power fantasy has always been. The female power fantasy, it doves back to what we said before about the woman just existing. And I haven't read Twilight myself, but I've read a lot of reviews of Twilight. I've talked to people who read Twilight, and they say that the main female character of Twilight doesn't really have anything going for her. She's not special in any sort of way, but she is the object of desire between the vampire and the werewolf. And she's painfully mediocre as a person, but just being painfully mediocre is enough to win the heart of this vampire, of this dashing vampire and this feral werewolf. And now the story is about, will she, won't she, with whomever, which one that she will choose to date. But they didn't put a lot of effort into who the female main character was. And that seems to be the female power fantasy, is that a woman gets to do and be who she is, oftentimes. And sometimes they'll take it to the extreme and the woman is an absolutely terrible person. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the idea is that the woman has this sort of inane blandness to her. Like we talked about Princess Peach for a long time. She didn't even have a name, all you knew about is that she was female, and that was enough. That was enough. And all the young boys of the world say, hey, I have to save the princess from the giant monkey. I have to save the princess from the giant turtle dragon. Bowser. Hey, is Bowser a dragon? I've been asking that question for a long time. He breathes fire. So is he a dragon? He's a giant turtle, though. Anyway, that was sort of the general idea, is that you put a princess on the other side of a monster or an adventure. She didn't need to be anything particularly special. Or if she was special in her beauty, how beautiful she was. And she would capture the hearts of a man just by her beauty alone. She would wink, her eyes would twinkle, and all of a sudden, every man in the universe would be like, oh my gosh, she's so beautiful. And then the feminists took over. And now a man is supposed to love you in spite of your flaws. And this is what we started seeing in these movies where women just do awful, awful things. And men are supposed to still love them. One of my least favorite movies in terms of this female power fantasy is the movies like The Best Man, for instance. In the movie The Best Man, if you've never seen it, it's a movie about a guy who wrote a book about having sex with his friend's girlfriend. But the way that the story is structured, it is that the boyfriend or the homeboy of the guy who wrote the book is a terrible cheater, and he's one of the most awful dudes of all time. And the girl had sex with the guy, and he's supposed to marry her anyway. That was the disgusting part of the movie, is that he finds out that his wife-to-be, his fiance, had sex with his best friend. He finds this out just days before his wedding, and then they get married anyway. That's the things that makes it a female power fantasy, is that a man is supposed to just take on the chin that you're this terrible, awful person who did this horrible thing. And it's okay. Often you will see this in female-driven movies, romantic comedies or something like that, where the woman is either evil, not maybe even supposed to be hilariously evil. Like she's clumsy, she's stupid, she chooses the wrong guy all the time. And the man still loves her anyway. I'll give you another example. The wrestling show Glow on Netflix. You see this story. It's about, all of these women who want to run this wrestling company. All these women want to be wrestlers. And it's a TV show. So it's a TV show about a TV show, sort of this meta commentary. And in one part of the story, there's a woman who wants to be a wrestler. Her husband doesn't really support the idea. And her husband kind of runs down the idea of her being a wrestler. And then they separate. She goes off and has sex with this wrestler who was played by Alex Riley, if I remember correctly. I think his name is Steel Horse. She meets this guy, immediately has sex with him. And then, I'm talking the same day, she becomes enamored with this guy. And through the power of his penis, she becomes a huge wrestling fan. And she really starts to buy into wrestling. And at the end of the show, the end of the first season rather, I didn't watch the second season. Her husband gets back with her, even after all of this stuff, even though she's, dogged him out, went out, had sex with some random guy, and came back to her husband like this was A-okay, like everything was fine. This is the female power fantasy, is that she can have it all. You can do everything. You can do anything. You can have the career, the man that you want, the man of your dreams, the man who's going to take care of you, and the fifth man you're physically attracted to. You can have them both at the same time and bounce back and forth. You know, the Renee Zellweger story. What was that? Bridget Jones' Diary or whatever, where, you know, you can bounce back and forth between these two guys, be painfully mediocre, not only in how you look, but how you present yourself. You're clumsy, you're goofy, you're yada, yada, yada. You don't have to be anything special. And yet you'll have guys falling all over themselves for you. That was sort of the female power fantasy for a long time. You know, Beauty and the Beast is another female power fantasy in which the man that you are attracted to, the man that you want, is kind of gross in a way. Like, you look at the Beast in Beauty and the Beast, he's kind of gross. You know, he's a bit of an incel. He's angry. But through your goodness, you change him. You change his behaviors. This is, you know, the woman being able to heal the heart of a broken man. You know, this happens a lot in TV shows or in movies and stuff like that. It's very romantic in a way where a woman's purity will, you know, a woman falls for the bad boy and she makes him less of a bad boy. Think of Bulma and Vegeta from Dragon Ball. You know, Vegeta's this, you know, alien eating, world destroying monster. And all of a sudden he meets Bulma, and Bulma, through her own selfishness, but she's still very beautiful. She's also very kind. Through her kindness, she warms Vegeta to becoming a better person. That's a female power fantasy. She was able to tame Vegeta, who is literally at one point a wild animal, a literal like wild gorilla. And Dragon Ball had enough time to really tell you the story of Vegeta, so that you can see the Vegeta before he met Bulma and then the Vegeta after he met Bulma. So you can see that, and that makes the story a little bit more romantic. And that sort of story exists, you know, pretty much wherever you have the bad boy in these movies, is that there will also be some pure of heart young lady who will come upon him and say, you know, you're not that bad of a guy after all. Through her purity and beauty and kindness, he will change and stop being the rogue who lives by the tip of his sword or whatever, and start living the way that she wants him to. She gets to tame the wild beast. And that's another female power fantasy. This is one that you often see in like Star Wars, I believe. Like, if I remember correctly, I think somebody told me this concept actually exists in Star Wars. And so you start to see that a lot. I think one of my favorite ones is the story of the Bible, Samson and Delilah, you know, where Delilah is just so beautiful that Samson is willing to tell her all of his secrets. He shares with her the secrets to his great power, his great strength. And even after Delilah deceives Samson, he still lets her come back, you know? So you see these stories of these female power fantasies that the woman can now break down the biggest, strongest man. She doesn't need to be the bigger, stronger person. Through being who she is, through her natural gifts, she can weaken a man. She can bring him low. And that's always sort of been the symbol of what a woman is. And often you will see that women soften men and that sort of thing. And that was the female power fantasy, is that a woman sees a guy who is capable of doing great and dangerous things, but then he's very nice and very kind to her. He is her guardian. He's her teddy bear. You know, that was always been the female power fantasy. But that's not the feminist power fantasy, I should say. The feminist power fantasy is to be male. Is to be Lady Thor. You know, to wield the hammer of Mjolnir, which represents Thor's penis. It's literally Freudian concept of penis envy. It is to be Red Sonja with a sword, you know, Wonder Woman with a sword. It is to wield the metaphorical penis of, you know, Black Widow with in the gun battles, you know, not being a seductress anymore. She's now a 5 feet of fury, fisticuffs, super fighter, you know, that sort of thing. And it's cool for fiction, but then you start to believe that in the real world. And in the real world, what you started to see was Women who cannot meet the physical requirements to be in the military get let in the military anyway. You started seeing women who doesn't meet the physical requirements to be police officers be let in anyway. And you started seeing these type of things in the real world. So you started, so you had like new problems that exist that would not have existed if we treated fantasy like fantasy, you know? One of, and I'll agree that this was completely and totally misogynistic, but I'm not saying it is wrong. Somebody once told me, you will know that there's nothing worth stealing in a place if there's women security guards. And I said to myself, wait a minute. So every time I go into a place now, I look at it and see if there's female security guards. And if there's female security guards, you can almost tell that there's nothing in there worth stealing, you know? And, and I can say you can extend that to like old people too. So if you see like old men in there, you can pretty much tell that there's nothing in there worth stealing. So to make it less misogynistic, I would extend it to the women, to old men or, you know, handicapped people or something like that. But in my actual literal experience, it's true. Whenever there's something worth stealing, there's young men there, especially young men who are armed. Like I've never seen a woman drive a Brinks truck. I've never seen it. Never seen it. You know, I've seen female security guards at libraries. I've never seen female bouncers at clubs. Never. You know, so it's almost as if we know, you know, that women should not be in those roles. And then we find ways to go around it. For instance, a lot of the women who are in the military, they're in support positions. They were often nurses, medical, stuff like that. Or now that there's a lot of IT to do, they're in that realm. So there's not a lot of women on the front line, you know, at least from what I was told. And you see a lot of female police officers, you know, a lot of them don't do the physical stuff. But you see a lot of female police officers shooting people because physically, if a guy drugged out on PCP, if a 6'2", 300-pound man can't handle it, what can a 5'6", 150-pound woman do? You know, so you often will see women try to arrest guys and they'll just shake them off because, you know, she's a woman. What is he supposed to do? But that's the difference between fiction and reality. In fiction, we can have Charlize Theron or Scarlett Johansson beat up 6-foot-tall men in fights, and we'll just be like, okay, Black Widow is trained from birth to be a super fighter. She's not super soldier type of thing, but you know, she knows pressure points and leverage and stuff like that. We can buy that Ronda Rousey could beat up most guys because she's a highly trained super fighter. Okay, so most MMA fighter women could beat up a random guy, you know, a random purse snatcher, sure. But then we started seeing that in the real world, most women are not MMA trained super fighters. You know, most of them are doughy, soft, daddy's girls who, you know, this is just a job for her. So as soon as some whacked out nut job, you know, decides to start throwing punches, she folds like a lawn chair. And that's reality, you know. But we also see that in certain parts of society, women have been taught that they can hit men, that they can say whatever they want to a man, and any type of retaliation is misogynistic or sexist or whatever. And that sort of has become our society these days, is that women have tried to take on the male role, but can't accept what comes with it. You know, death comes with it. You know, perhaps being harmed physically comes with it. And that we don't hold women to the same standards that we hold men. And I don't know if I talked about this on this channel before, but I'm going to talk about it now. There's this concept called relational aggression. It comes from this psychologist named Nikki Craig. And the relational aggression concept is that if you look at bullying in schools, this was in the 90s, I think, when she did her studies. You look at bullying in schools. When you look at physical assaults, boys are number one. Pushing, shoving, hitting, boys are number one. But if you factor in gossiping, spreading rumors, girls are actually bully more than boys. And that's one of the things that our society does not take into account is that aggression for girls is different than aggression for boys. Aggression for women is different from aggression for men. One of the way women enact revenge is what is called relationship savaging. And what I mean by that is they will often tell stories. Women will call the police and say, he hit me, he beat me up. You have this whole thing going on at the time of recording of Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. Because Amber Heard, who was violent in her own way, told everybody that Johnny Depp was the violent one. And I don't want to get in down the rabbit hole because I haven't been following that. But I'm telling you, the whole thing is you will see that often. You will see how often in divorces, a woman will say, he raped me, he beat me up in order to get the kids, in order to get more money, or whatever the case may be. The system incentivizes a woman to be the victim because our society knows that women are weaker, smaller than men, and the laws are adjusted for that. So, no, a man is not going to hit a woman and be able to get away with it. Domestic violence is pretty much a non-starter anywhere, except maybe the NFL, but, domestic violence could cost you your job, no matter what job that is. A man hitting a woman, a man beating his wife can cost him his job. But how many times have we heard that a wife hit her husband and nothing happened to her? Oh, he must have done something wrong. He did something wrong for her to wild out and hit him like that, even though women oftentimes hit more than men do in these situations. Now, if you look at domestic violence statistics, the most violent relationships are lesbian relationships, not men on men relationships. It is situations in which men are not involved. It is single family homes or single parent homes in which the woman is the sole provider. She abuses children. Now, this is not considered domestic violence, even though it should be. If you look at domestic violence, yes, because domestic violence is almost always going to be men, women in the same house. But if you feature domestic violence as no man in the house, but women and children, because that's domestic, that's a household, it's number one with a bullet, especially in the black community where women abuse children. And then if you take into account the lesbian relationships, lesbians abuse each other more than men abuse women. But the story is, and always will be, that men should not hit women and that men are the abusers of women. And that's because there are more situations in which a man is going to abuse a woman. There may be a woman who will get abused by another woman. It's going to be more heterosexual relationships than lesbian relationships, for instance. But there's definitely, I believe, more situations of single mothers abusing their children than even men abusing women. But you never have those conversations. But Nikki Crick, when she was talking about relational aggression, she said if you take into account how often girls tell stories of gossip, basically incite violence. They will use proxy violence. They'll tell a big brother about something. They'll tell a cousin or about something. And in order to start a fight. And often you see this problem in the neighborhoods. A girl will tell her brother, tell her cousin, tell somebody else, this guy said this to me, this guy did this to me, and leave it to the other person to do something about it. And then once he does something, he has to take the fall for it. The girl kind of walks away scot-free, even though it was her who told him about it in the first place. That sort of thing is not counted as violence for women. Proxy violence is not counted as violence for women, even though it probably should be. Situations where a man may lose his job, lose his career, is not considered aggression by women. A woman who lies about being raped because he won't call her back, that's not considered aggression or violence by women. It's proxy violence. It's, we're going to say something about, there's been numerous stories, especially for football players in college. He's probably about to go to the NFL or something like that, and this girl wants to hook up with him. He hooks up with her, yet he won't talk to her anymore because, he's going to the NFL. He can get any girl he wants. And so she gets upset. She goes to somebody and says, well, he raped me. And there was a football player, I believe he played for the Houston Texans. And that followed him his entire life. I think he actually got pulled from the team because he was accused of rape in college by somebody he did not rape. But that person was just upset with him. So we don't count a lot of different types of aggression that the women can do. And we still will say that women are weak. We say women are the weaker sex, but they have stronger social powers. In so much that we have taken female weakness and codified it into law and codified it into ourselves to say that women need extra protection because they're not as big and as strong as a man. They need extra protection. This extra protection comes in the form of being able to get help almost immediately when they need it. So this extra protection also comes with the benefit of the doubt. There was a story about a young woman. I'm not going to say her name. She was released from prison recently because of Kim Kardashian. The young lady was said to be a sex trafficking victim who murdered a guy who had raped her, and she was in prison all these years because she was really the victim of sex trafficking. You look into the story and you find out that yes, she was 16 years old and she was a prostitute. But the guy that she shot and killed, she, one, never had sex with him. Two, the guy was asleep when she shot him. He had never actually touched her. Three, she robbed him after the fact. She shot him while he was asleep. Then she robbed his house, stole his truck, and took it back to her pimp. And guess what? Kim Kardashian, because they played the victim card, was able to get the girl out of prison. Now, she had been in prison for like 10 to 20 years at that point. But she had gotten out of prison. She got away with murder, essentially, by playing the victim card, by saying, well, I was underage and victimized, and I had fetal alcohol syndrome because my mom was an alcoholic, and all these sad sob stories that women are allowed to bring into every situation, and they get away with it. There was another story that celebrities had gotten themselves involved with. There was a lady who had gotten arrested for attempted homicide. She had shot at her husband. Immediately, the first thing that they did was the husband was abusive. That was the story. The husband had been abusing her. And she got the gun to stop her husband who was about to abuse her again. And then you look into the story and you find out her and her husband got into an argument. She left, went into the garage, got the gun, came back, and then shot at him. He called the police and she got arrested. Well, she still got away with it because society has been told that if you blame the man, if you blame somebody else for what the woman did, she can get away with it. There's 100 different types of excuses for women's bad behavior in our society. And this is the new female empowerment. We can always blame postpartum depression for a woman who murders her children. We can always blame PMS for a woman who got a bad temper or she's having a bad day. Oh, well, she's just on her period. There's all of these different excuses for women for when they do something wrong. And men are twisting and turning themselves and have been taught to, and in a way, accept that a woman, even when she does something horrible, is not really all that bad of a person. She was made bad by the circumstances in which she found herself in. Now, this brings us to Doctor Strange 2, Multiverse of Madness. Now, I didn't tell this whole entire thing here to talk about this whole movie. But the movie is about Wanda Maximoff, aka the Scarlet Witch. And she's on the search for her children. Her children never existed. She dreamed them up. But to her, that the children are real. This is actually comic accurate. Wanda did have phony children that she dreamed up in her head. And she went on a killing spree. So Wanda goes through this movie just absolutely shredding realities and killing people in search of a way to have her children returned to her, even though they're not her children. And throughout the entire movie, you're led to feel bad for the Scarlet Witch, as she is sort of a woman who is searching for her children. She just wants her children back, but she never had children. She's delusional. She's having a delusional moment. But everybody is supposed to feel bad for her because, well, no matter how many people she murders, it's all for her children. And that's okay. Even though, no, that's not okay. Like, we don't hold women to these same standards. No, it's not okay. In the comic books, Wanda does something similar. She kind of goes nuts. But interestingly enough, and I asked this question on Twitter, that Wanda is nutty in the comics, but we know why. Chthon, the elder god of, something or other in Marvel, he operates through Wanda. So sometimes he possesses Wanda and she goes crazy and murders people. It's not necessarily her fault. It's the demon that is living within her at that point. That's a perfect thing they could have used for the movie. Of course, in the comics, it's the general idea that I've been discussing here, that Wanda doesn't make bad decisions. Wanda doesn't fuck up. What happens is she has all these powers she doesn't really understand, and then occasionally this demon just pops up and takes over her body, murders a bunch of people, and she needs to be stopped. And then, of course, it's the same thing with Jean Grey in comics, where she's possessed by the Phoenix, and the Phoenix causes her to do all these horrible things, and she needs to die. She has to sacrifice herself so that the Phoenix can leave her alone and stop possessing her and making her do terrible things. She, of course, is pure of heart. She's, a wonderful individual who would never hurt a fly. And then, oh my God, Phoenix! Now I'm going to murder a bunch of people. And it's the same thing with Scarlet Witch. Well, occasionally Chthon will wake up and decide he's going to operate in our world through Wanda, and he's going to operate in evil ways. And they did not use that in, spoilers, they did not use that in Doctor Strange, which seemed like it would have been a great way to excuse Wanda's behavior, is to blame the nearest male, which would have been Chthon in this situation. Of course, you had to bring Chthon into the Marvel Universe, but why not? It would at least been a comic accurate a reason why Wanda was acting up. But Wanda in the movie, in the press around the movie, gets a lot of sympathy because her character is driven mad by this desire for her children, which, in our cultural moment where we're talking about abortion, is a very intriguing thing, that the Scarlet Witch is willing to cross multiverses and murder all these people for her babies. And we have a society where we're, stalking the Supreme Court because people want to murder their children. But, that's neither here nor there. Another interesting thing is when we look at the female power fantasy, it is, women get to overreact to smaller slights than men. For instance, when you look at, a lot of male superheroes, they often need to be enticed in order to engage. Somebody has to be physically getting beaten up. Somebody has to be getting robbed in order for somebody to get involved. And a lot of these female superhero movies, they're triggered by the smallest thing possible. Hey, beautiful, maybe you should smile more. And all of a sudden we can break his hand and steal his stuff. And it's like, wait a minute. We can break his hand and steal his stuff for calling you baby, for calling you sweetheart. It's okay for you to abuse him. And you see this stuff a lot, and especially in a lot of the modern superhero movies. You'll see the female superheroes be incredibly thin-skinned. They cannot take a single joke. They are completely joyless. They're ugly on the inside. Anybody who, and it's fostered by our real world, where that's all sexual harassment now. You saying, hey babe, how you doing, is sexual harassment. Therefore, you're going to get fired from your job. You may get written up or whatever. But in superhero land, in fictional stories, you hit on a woman, all of a sudden you deserve to die, or you deserve to face strong physical pain for saying hey or hello, or saying that she needs to smile more. And that's supposed to be heroic. And it's like, women don't understand heroism because that's not their realm. And that's what I said, all of that stuff to say that. A lot of women don't understand heroism because it's not ordinarily their realm. Women have never been asked to do anything. Therefore, they don't really understand heroism. A lot of the great female heroes were written and created by men because they follow the male story. You know, a feminist story will turn women into psychopaths who do horrible stuff, say horrible stuff, and beat people up over the littlest thing. A male story will look at action and reaction. You know, Wonder Woman. What's going on here? What horrible thing is Ares doing to people in order for Wonder Woman to get involved? Wonder Woman is not going to be triggered by someone saying that she's a beautiful woman and maybe she should smile more and, hey, I like that skirt and you have a nice ass or whatever. She's not going to fly off and punch people in the face for that, you know, because the character, as crafted by males, knows that even if that stuff is wrong, we don't go into violence for that. Batman doesn't beat people up for catcalling. You know, Batman doesn't beat people up for the littlest thing. And you talk to people about it, they'll say, you know, men do not find honor in beating up weaker people or beating up people who are in any way less than themselves. You know, you have to be of a certain level of danger before a man finds honor in actually fighting and getting involved with you, which is why Batman villains are absolute psychopaths, like, you know, the Joker and the Penguin and, you know, Two-Face or whatever. They'll murder whole rooms of people if they have to, which makes it honorable that Batman, being a single man, will get involved. The feminist empowerment of this concept will take small slights done by males and blow them out of proportion to the point where the woman feels threatened by a man saying she has nice legs, so therefore we're going to break his arms and break his back and throw him into the sun or whatever, you know, because women have no experience actually being asked to do anything. And that's kind of how our society is. You know, when you look at Daddy's little girl, all she really needs to do is stay sweet and pure, and Daddy will be very, very happy. You know, when you ask a guy, what do you want for your son? I want him to be an astronaut. I want him to be a football player. I want him to be a lawyer. I want him to be a doctor. I want him to be an astronaut or something, you know. What do you want for your daughters? I just want her to be happy. You know, I just want her to stay a virgin until she's married. And I just, you know, I want to keep her off the pole. I don't want her to be a porn star, you know. And so then our society, in order to empower women, will empower the whores. You know, we will empower porn stars and we will empower prostitutes, and we will do that because it's an affront to dad. You know, the dads of the world had never asked anything of their daughters except to stay pure and be happy. I want my daughter to be beautiful and pure. I have never asked her to do anything else. And then society will take your daughter, turn her into an ugly drug addict, prostitute, because shove it up your ass, dad. And that's been our society for the last 20 to 30 years. Now, I'm not a person who's against prostitution. I think it should be illegal. I think pornography is perfectly fine, used in moderation. But I understand that these things are not things to be celebrated. It is degeneracy, and it should not be celebrated. It should exist. We should allow people to do whatever it is within their heart's desire to do, but it should not be celebrated. I remember getting into it with some libertarians about this. Reason magazine. I got into it with some bunch of those people because they were using Ayala Girl, who was like an OnlyFans millionaire who was selling herself online. And I said, you know, I disagree with this. Legally, she should be able to do whatever she wants. But morally, it's disgusting. And you can't tell people that libertarianism means that my daughter gets to go sell her pussy online. That you will never get people to vote for you if that's going to be your running idea. I'm running on the concept of my daughter should be a prostitute. Well, not my daughter, your daughter, right? Because I would never want that for my daughter, but your daughter can be a prostitute. Your daughter should go out there and be a sex worker. That's what our society is pushing upon them. Either they want the girls to be boys and like boys or like men and take on masculine roles, even at the sacrifice of what they might want themselves. Which is why you see so many bitter old women who don't have children. They're very, very angry. They're especially angry at somebody like Kevin Samuels, who died recently, and they were tap dancing on his grave. Look, I don't know that much about the guy, but from what I do know about him, he told people things that they didn't want to hear. And therefore, they tripped out, and now they're very, very happy that he's dead. You know, like, that's evil. Being happy somebody died, he didn't hurt you, who only hurt your feelings. That's dark. That's a very, very dark reality. And I'm not saying that sometimes I don't feel the same way, but I'm saying is that people need to realize that society is fostering a lot of bitterness in people because these girls have been told that they can have it all by feminism. You can have the high priced job. You can have it yourself. You don't need to marry the number one lawyer in the country anymore. You can go and be the number one lawyer in the country anymore. But they also tell you that any sacrifice that is asked of you is completely and totally unfair. Oh, I have to work 80 hours a week in order to become the CEO of a company. I have to work my own hours. I have to, bust my ass. I have to do all this type of stuff. It's like, yeah, because a lot of these guys who are, CEOs of major companies, they may marry the first woman who ever looks at them. They don't have a history of laying down with 200 to 300 chicks a night. And, guys who do that kind of stuff, who put all their energy into women, typically they don't become multimillionaires over time. The guys who specialize and they work hard and they work 70 to 80 hours a week and they bust their ass to become multimillionaires, usually they get married, they have one woman, and they're stuck with that one woman. A woman can't really do the same thing because, again, she has to have children. If she has children, she's going to be out of the working track for a long time. In other words, she cannot have it all. Self-sacrifice is necessary. And that is the core of all of this stuff that I've been talking about today. Women have never been asked to sacrifice. We've never asked women to defend men. We've never like this society now is the first society in which we're asking women to defend men. But this is the first time we've ever asked women to defend men, right? We've never asked women to sacrifice anything before. And we see what happens when you ask women to sacrifice. They flip out. A woman doesn't even want to sacrifice for her own children in today's world. We can't ask women to sacrifice anything in today's world. So how can they possibly be good heroes? They don't know how to sacrifice anything. And then, if a woman does sacrifice something, like, Black Widow, they caught a lot of heat, Marvel did, when they said Black Widow couldn't have children. They were like, oh my God, you've taken away her ability to have children. It's like, well, sorry, she can't have children in the comics either, as far as I know. Secondly, it was part of her sacrifice to become who she is that she was made sterile in order to do it. Because she's a seductress. I mean, she's going to be having sex with strange men. She can't afford to get pregnant. So yes, there's going to be, some sterility going on here. And quite often it was forced upon her, so it wasn't her decision in the first place. But we asked heroes to sacrifice. That's the core of this thing. I seemed like I was rambling, but if you look back at everything that I said, when you ask women to sacrifice, you see at the beginning, women are human beings. Men are human doings. We never ask women to sacrifice. Female heroes, in order to be a true female hero, in order to be a hero that a man would appreciate, they have to know sacrifice. We never ask women to sacrifice. And because we never ask women to sacrifice, instead we go out of our way to appease women in our society through social, legal, all kinds of constructions. We appease women. We don't ask them to sacrifice anything. Because we don't ask them to sacrifice, how can they truly be heroes? How can true female empowerment actually occur? All right. Thank you for listening. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later.